Sweet. Okay, we are live. Awesome. Thank you all for joining our second Logic Apps webcast. We're really excited to have you all here. We honestly didn't know how the first one was going to go. You set this up and you don't know if anyone's going to join or if they're going to like it, but we actually got a really good response from it. So we're excited to do this one. We will be doing one next month. So thank you all for joining and for sending your comments and questions too. So before we get started, I will introduce myself. I'm Jeff Holland, a program manager in Azure for Logic Apps. And I'm joined by two guests today. Kevin might look a little bit more familiar, but Steven, well, he might look familiar. He's a Logic Apps celebrity. But Steven, you want to go ahead and introduce?
Sure. So I'm Steven Siciliano. I've been working on Logic Apps for a long time now, such as it is. And I'm going to do a cool demo here today.
Sweet. Like Kevin?
I'm Kevin Lamb, another program manager on Logic Apps, and I'll be talking about what's new and what's upcoming at the end of the webcast.
That's right. I think people might see Kevin on the right. Well, just cut to the Kevin part. But the Steven part's actually really, really good today. So before we get started, I did want to kind of highlight some of the awesome stuff that's been going on in the community over the last month. I actually took some time over the last week to comb through some different tweets and emails and blog posts that have been posted. And I submitted kind of a highlight reel up on our MSDN blog. So if you look at the description of this video, there's actually a link to that post. But I invite you all to check it out. There's been some cool stuff, some blog posts around leveraging SAP functionality into the cloud through Logic Apps, some SQL demos that people did. Someone built a Logic App to provision Office 365 sites automatically. There's a lot even that I didn't include. I know that there's some people doing some awesome stuff with range and repeat over Salesforce records to sync Salesforce records with different systems. So thank you to those who sent us your stuff. And again, just an open invitation to anyone in the community. Tag us in a tweet at LogicApps.io or send us an email at logicappslive@microsoft.com. We'd love to see what you've been working on and share it out with the community because that's awesome. And you'll see too on Twitter and through email in the forums, we're active. We don't let things sit there. We respond. We'll help people out if you get stuck or have any feedback. So thanks to the many of you who participated since last month, and we hope to see it continue. We are actually going to try something new during this live webcast too. I'm not positive how well it will work because we haven't done it before. But if you follow the link, I think in this video, there'll be a link to the Hangout that will pop up. If you follow the Google Hangout link, there should be an option to do Q&A. And if you have any questions that you want to ask myself, Kevin, or Steven, you can go ahead and open that and submit your questions, and I'll keep an eye on those today. And if we see any questions, we'll answer all the questions. Whether or not we can answer them or have an answer for them, we'll see. So I invite you to do that if you have any questions, or I'll have another tab open with Twitter as well, so you can just tag us at LogicApps.io. So anyway, let's get started. We've got some honestly awesome stuff today. I'm just going to kind of let Steven take over. Some things that will hopefully be exciting that cover some of our user voice suggestions. So Steven, let me actually switch so that everyone can see your screen, and we'll get started.
Hopefully this will work.
So we should be able to see, oh, there's our user voice right there.
Technology. Cool. So if you haven't seen user voice yet, please take a look. So it's feedback.azure.com, and it's the way that we kind of can collect and understand what is really important for you guys, our customers. And what's great about it is not only can you suggest ideas, but you also can vote on ideas. So that gives us the ability to see what are the top things that people really care about and what they need to see fixed. So what I have on my screen right now, this is the number one item on user voice is, can we have the ability to have simple code expressions in Logic Apps? The scenarios, I think, are innumerable. The one called out here is specifically, I have some objects and I want to do some simple iteration on top of them, but the expression language doesn't have the function that this person wants to use. And it can be a big problem because, obviously, our workflow language, we're never going to have a fully Turing complete, system out there that can execute any arbitrary code. That's very intentional because the way our system is built is the Logic Apps engine runs in a multi-tenant fashion. So if we could just execute any arbitrary code inside of Logic Apps itself, that would really have a negative impact to performance and reliability and all those things. But what we can do, and what I will show you today, is a super simple way to integrate expressions into a logic app by using a simple API app. So what we've done is we've gone and created a couple API apps you can take advantage of. And there's two of them that I'd like to highlight. There's a JavaScript API app and a C# API app. And what these two API apps do is they allow you to enter in the Logic Apps Designer just a snippet of code. So let me open up one of these here. So this is just the Azure portal. So what I've done is I've deployed one of these JavaScript API apps. And if we open it up in the API app experience, you can see the API definition for this. Now, the API definition is very straightforward. There are exactly two operations that you can do. The first is to execute some code, and the second is for triggering. And I'll cover triggering in just a moment. Now, what you can do with this API app is you can drop it on to your Logic app, and then you can have it run some code. So here's a Logic app that I created that shows an example of this both for the trigger and for the action. So the parameters are very straightforward. The first parameter is some expression, and the second parameter is context objects. So what the expression is this is literally just a couple lines of JavaScript, or one line even. So you can type, whatever is valid JavaScript here you want. So I could do, var foo, and then I could do, return foo plus something like this. So in this case, what it will return back is var baz concatenated. Now, what's particularly useful is for triggers, you can actually determine whether or not the Logic app fires by either returning back a value or by returning back false. So if, for example, if I want the Logic app to never fire, which isn't a super good scenario, but I can just do return false. And in that case, the Logic app engine will pull every minute this expression, and when the expression returns true, which will be never, it will run. So in this case, it'll never run. But I could do something else, which I have in this little doc here. So I can put in, for example, if I want the Logic app to run between the 15s and the 30s of the hour, so basically to run for 15 minutes every hour, I can do that by using an expression just like, just like this one. So if I paste this in here, and, nope, I lost my tab. If I paste this in, then what I would expect is the Logic app won't actually start running until 11:15, and then at 11:15 it'll execute until 11:30. So you can do really anything you imagine with built-in JavaScript capabilities. But what's particularly useful is you can then integrate the values that come from the Logic app into the JavaScript expression. So you see here what I did is I actually am returning some content that comes from the trigger. So you can use the normal Logic app's expression language interleaved with the JavaScript code that you write. Now, one of the scenarios that we kind of thought of as a good example for this is if I have an Office 365 app that triggers whenever there's a new email. The problem with that is when that action fires off a trigger, it fires off a payload that looks a little bit like this. And I don't know why it's formatted correctly, not formatted correctly. But you should see what happens here is there's an object for the file attachment. And the file attachment has a property called name, and it has a subobject called content. And the subobject actually contains the content data and the content type. But the problem is the Yammer connector, for example, the schema for its attachments takes the name, content, data, content type, and content transfer encoding as peer properties. So they're all adjacent to each other. So if I just try to flow the attachment from Office 365 directly into Yammer, it will actually fail because it doesn't have a matching schema. Now, this is actually our fault. When we created these connectors, we probably should have come up with a schema that's the same for both.
Well, it's hard too, because I know part of it, right, like you have their APIs, but yeah, it's a problem that popped up that that we ran into and we're like, oh,
Yeah,
garbage.
So one of the ways to fix this would be, hey, we can go back and we can fix the schema
And create
But-
like a universal attachment schema.
Yeah, exactly. But that won't necessarily extend to every single connector in the world. So just as this is a simple scenario, you can definitely imagine that there are other scenarios where you want to do a simple transformation of an object from one schema to another. You have all the data that you need, but the language won't support that type of transformation. So what we did here is I can actually paste this code snippet right here right into that API, and it will actually transform that attachment payload from the Office 365 schema into the schema that I need for the Yammer connector. So let's go to this logic app that I've set up. And if this all loads up successfully, so you can see here I have the Office 365 connector. That triggers based on basically anything coming into my inbox. And you can see one of the outputs is going to be that attachments object. And you can see here's the attachments array. There's a name at the top level, and then underneath this is the content with the content data. Whereas the Yammer connector here, what this takes attachments, which is just an array with that other schema. So what I've done is in the middle, I've put in this JavaScript API app. And you can see here, I simply am mapping the attachments object. And in that map, I am assigning the file name property to be the name from the Office 365 object. The other thing that's important is I'm passing in context from the logic app. So in the logic app itself, I'm outputting this attachments object. And you can see I can flow that in here. So this context object represents the attachments. So you can flow in any context that you want. In fact, you can flow in any number of properties that you need. And then inside of the JavaScript expression, you can just directly reference that property. So you can see here, I have a property called attachments. And then in the JavaScript expression, I'm just directly referencing that. So once I run this, then what you'll see is, hopefully my email doesn't have any offensive attachments.
You didn't tell anyone beforehand you were doing this, right?
No, I didn't. So I did run this a little earlier, though, so we can look at a previous instance of this. So here is the logic app run. And this is another new feature which Kevin, I won't steal Kevin's thunder, but you can actually come in here and you can see the outputs of the Office 365 connector. So you can see here the body, and I don't want this one. There was one that had an attachment. Let's say maybe it's this one. And output slate.
Attachments. Oh yeah, there it is.
So you can see here, I put two attachments on my email, and you can see the schema for these objects, the name and the content. And then you can see the JavaScript API app. So this thing took as inputs the two attachments, and you see it just passed it directly in, and then along with that, the code expression that I wanted to execute. And what it will output, hopefully, will be that direct schema. So you can see here, it's actually flattened out those objects, and now it has a file name property instead. So when I put that post on Yammer, you can see, again, it will have the schema that the Yammer post expects, and that succeeded to do the post. In just one line of code, I was able to transform from one type of object to another. Now, the last thing I want to show is how I actually built this API app and deployed. So all of the API apps that we're going to be sharing with you are at a new GitHub repository called Logic Apps IO. And Logic Apps IO, we will be contributing some samples here, and you will also, from the community, be able to submit pull requests, and we can also put that in this repository as well. What's great about this is there's a very easy way to deploy directly into Azure from this repository. This is actually a feature that you can do for a variety of things in Azure, not just us. There's another repository, for example, that contains templates for virtual machines. And for that, you can just deploy a bunch of virtual machine images. But for our purposes, here's an API app. And you can see it just gives me connected to my Azure subscription. It gives me the directories and the resource groups. So I can just deploy with basically one button click that API app into my subscription, into the resource group that I want to contain this API app. I already did that, obviously, because I did the demo, but it's pretty straightforward. And the actual API app itself is also very simple. This is built in Node, so you can build API apps in Java, Node, or in C#. And the API app, really all it does is just this file right here. It's a total of 58 lines. And it just takes, it has these two operations, again, that I mentioned. And all it does is it takes the body and gets the context object if it's provided, and it runs in new context. So this is a capability that Node has built in, is to actually execute some code and pass it some sandbox that will be the objects, and then it can return back the output. So you can see most of the code here is actually just logging. And along with this, I also defined the Swagger for this API app, and you can see the Swagger file is actually longer than the API app itself. And the Swagger is, of course, how the Logic app can know what the set of operations are, what the descriptions look like, and how to use it inside of Logic App Designer. You can see it's really actually straightforward to build an API app, no matter what language you want to use. And with the one-click deploy, you can contribute them and have them be used by really anybody in the community.
It's very cool, and we were kind of hoping to, another very popular request on User Voice is, can you open source some of your connectors, right? So we can see how these things work. And part of our goal with this GitHub repository at Logic Apps IO is you can see we've got a sample up there that's similar to our Q connector, the C# one, which is built on ASP.NET, and this Node one, kind of give you an idea of here's some of the tools and techniques we use to deploy our API app. So it's hopefully good stuff for you to poke around, look at. Feel free to contribute. If you've got a pull request, the C# one, I did a lot of the writing on this one. I'd never compiled code inside of an API app before, so I had to figure out all the code DOM and all that stuff. If you have a recommendation or a pull request, feel more than welcome to poke around this. But hopefully it's easy to look, see the code, learn, and deploy with one click into your own subscription.
Great. That was all I had.
Sweet. That's awesome. I just saw we've got we don't have any questions yet, but we do have people on Twitter saying that they love the custom code expressions. So that's good. So we can just, and the other, before we pass it over to Kevin, we do have, you'll notice if you go to github.com/logicappsio, there is a repo called Community. And we want to invite all of you, if you've got an API app, maybe it's as useless as you might think, maybe all it does is output hello world, right? But it's something that you want to share. Feel free to pull a pull request if it's a Logic App definition or a custom API app like what we've shown. We want to be able to kind of showcase and let others within the community one click to deploy. And we'll do what we can to continue to add to this. I know Steve and I have both been working on a few more API apps that we hope to push to this GitHub in the, I don't want to make a hard commitment, but the coming days. So keep an eye on it. So awesome. Kevin, you can go ahead for the update now.
All right. So what's new? In case you guys didn't know and you're not paying attention to our gallery, one of the things that we've released is a Slack connector. So if you have some scenarios where you want to integrate with Slack, either read Slack messages or post to Slack, you can now do that in the Logic app. I'll let out all the thunder there. That's okay. So the next thing is filter gallery items in the designer. So we talked about the last time in our webcast how we were working on this. We actually got this done. And if you go onto the right hand side of your Logic app, you'll be able to start searching for the different connectors on the right hand side. Next, improved tooltips. You actually saw a little hint of this when Stephen was going through the designer, and he highlighted some of the little information bubbles where you get to actually see richer descriptions, information about the action and the parameters, where you actually get the types of the parameters that are going in. So you have a lot more data at your fingertips when you're looking through the designer. And another thing that Steve had highlighted was the Richard run blade information. That included the actual trigger that fired, the name of that trigger, the trigger output, so whatever output that trigger had come up with and is going to pass into the logic app is now visible in that run blade view. The correlation IDs. Now you can see what the correlation is for that instance of the workflow. And finally, logic app output. So in your logic app definition, you can actually have output from your logic app. And now, if you have included that in your logic app definition, you can actually see that in the run. We don't provide a way for you to describe that in the designer, but if you've done it on your own by hand, you can actually see that. So what's in progress? The last time we talked, I had mentioned that we were working on Do Until, and we are still working on Do Until. So we promise it's still coming, but that's still in progress. We had also talked about moving logic apps across subscriptions. We said that we were working on that last time, and we're still working on that now, and that should be released really soon. Both of these are on the cusp of being released. We're just working through some details with this. Another one that's just around the corner is configurable retry policy. So now on an action, you have a built-in retry policy so that if you get 4xx, we will actually retry that action a number of times. But you may want to set your own retry policy, either turn it off or determine the actual interval and number of times that you want to be able to do a retry. So we're adding that to the capabilities of actions. The Azure SDK. So we're going to be releasing an Azure SDK so that you can go ahead and manage all your logic apps from code. So that will include both .NET, C# and Node. And finally, template start is integrated into Designer. So one of the things that we want to do is help you get started. When you first open that Designer, we want to create a great starting experience. And so we're going to give you some helpers so that you're not starting from a blank canvas and you actually can start with some of the templates. We've released some of these templates in the gallery, in the marketplace, but we'll make that more front and center when you start looking at the definition of your logic app. So Stephen called us out. If you're really interested in a feature that somebody else has already posted, or you want to create your own feature, please go to feedback.azure.com. I've actually posted the form ID for logic apps. Go there and vote for your feature. We do look at that list, and it helps us prioritize what everybody out in the community thinks is important to them, and we will address that. The more votes, the more attention it gets from us. That's it.
Perfect. Very good. Very packed couple of stuff. So I was just looking. It doesn't look like we have any specific questions from anyone right now, which is good. So feel free, though, offline, like last time. I know after the last webcast, over the next day or two, questions and comments would filter in. And part of the reason we do this webcast, too, is we want you to see what we're prioritizing, what we're working on, how we're approaching some of these problems that you've brought up. And we want your feedback, too. If you're like, hey, this is awesome, this totally solves what I was talking about in user voice, let us know. Or if you're like, hey, there's still this scenario we want to enable. So keep that channel open. Tweet us, email us, whatever's easiest for you. We hope you continue to do that. The other thing I'll mention, too, is we actually have a few, as we're running and enabling all these awesome features that Kevin highlighted, we actually have an opportunity if you would be interested in potentially joining our team, joining either the Logic Apps team that works on kind of the Logic Apps engine, or help with some of our SaaS integration connectors. We do have some openings, and we are looking. So if you have experience at all with that type of development and you'd be interested, shoot me an email. Probably the best email is logicappslive@microsoft.com, and I can send you some of the information there too. But we thought this was a good audience to kind of plug that too. We are looking for some great talent, and it's a good place to be. You get to work with Stephen and Kevin every day, which
And Jeff.
and me. That's right. I'll try to stay in the shadows. So let's see.
We're always looking for great engineers.
So we do have one question, and we'll go ahead and answer it because we have some time. And Kevin and Stephen, this one's definitely for you. It says, what are the mechanics under the hood related to retry? Where are messages stored in between retry intervals?
So the Logic Apps engine persists every single iteration of the runs. So like just as if I run an action and that's persisted in our Azure storage, every retry is also persisted. So what that means is none of the data is ever going to be lost. But I don't think, do we have an expression that allows you to go back and retrieve, like in the retry, can you actually go back and get a value from a previous retry?
That should be in your history.
So I mean, after the fact, but like inside of the execution, you can't go get it. Right?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So basically, it will it'll still be there, but as it executes, you can't be like, hey, if last time I got a 4xx, now do something different.
But we will be able to do that when we get the do until feature.
Awesome. Okay, so there you go. So you'll be able to do that with do until. Yep.
Perfect. And then the last question that we'll go with, it's a good one. I can already guess what the answer is, but it's any updates on GA for Logic Apps? Kevin, I think that's you.
Sure. We are feverishly driving towards GA. We have not lost focus. We can't commit to any date, but we are definitely it's a high priority thing for us to hit GA. We have a lot of dependencies and things that we have to work through and make sure those things land underneath us. But perfect.
So I am IMing with Samir right now, who works on the connectors, and he says there are two things he would like to announce. So for the Twitter connector, we now support the streaming API, which means it's more scalable, and more specifically, it's going to support all the different search operators that Twitter now has. And the other thing is the SMTP connector now supports the from field. So when you send an email, you can specify where the email comes from.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much again. Thanks, Stephen and Kevin, for joining. We will be doing one of these next month. We'll announce the date for that soon. So follow us on Twitter or subscribe to this YouTube channel, whatever's easiest to stay updated. So thanks again, and hope you have a great rest of the day.